You're watching Access Minnesota. Here's Jim Dubois.
For many Minnesotans, the sight of melting snow and later sunsets is a sign of relief. But with spring comes severe and often unpredictable weather. To find out more about the changes in spring weather, Access Minnesota talks with Kenny Blumenfeld. Kenny Blumenfeld is a visiting assistant professor of geography at the University of Minnesota and community faculty in the Natural Sciences Department at Metro State University and the director of projects at ORC International. Kenny, welcome to Access Minnesota.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
I want to talk a little bit too. Your teaching and research interests include extreme and hazardous weather, including tornadoes, flash floods, and blizzards. And today we're talking about the arrival of spring. And of course, with spring, we see the return of severe weather. Now, this year, the spring weather arrived even before the official start of the season. What happens in the atmosphere in the late winter and early spring that sets the stage for severe weather?
I always tell students that spring is really just sort of summer replacing winter. And this year, there wasn't really much of a winter, right? And I think the spring established itself a lot earlier than it normally would anyway. So it wasn't really a traditional sort of transition season, but we did have, but it is still the sort of handoff from the colder weather because the sun is so weak in the winter to, now the much warmer weather. You can feel the sun's strength when it's shining on you, and that's basically what fuels this whole transition.
Now, how do those forces that create the storms change when we enter the period from mid-spring to early summer?
As we come out of winter and move into spring, there's a lot of temperature contrast in the atmosphere. The equatorial and tropical regions are still very warm even during the winter time, but it's very cold in, say, the Arctic and polar regions. And that tends to fuel the jet stream, this sort of powerful channel of wind in the upper atmosphere. And what happens is a lot of the storm systems that come together in the spring, they're still drawing on that powerful jet stream style energy, and they have a lot of sort of what we call dynamics associated with them, which is just a catch-all term that says the winds are powerful, they're fairly complicated, they often change directions with height, and they increase in speed with height. And oftentimes, the big difference is when you have the strong winds aloft, storms move fast. As you move into summertime, we lose that temperature contrast between the equator and the poles. I mean, the poles start warming, and there's a lot, the jet stream starts to weaken. The winds aloft, they aren't as strong anymore, and what ends up happening is the storms generally slow down. And this is sort of what so we start out moving through the season with the if we're going to have severe weather, it's going to be fast-moving, long-lasting, and then as the season warms, storms just start to slow down.
While the issue of global warming remains controversial, it is a fact that many parts of the U.S. are experiencing warmer and wetter conditions than normal. Does this increase the potential for severe weather?
Oh, this is one of these questions that we wish we had the answer for. Because people want to know, insurance companies want to know, especially now that we really know that climate change or global warming, we know that that's real. We know there's some nuance and some things that we don't know exactly how it's going to turn out, how they're going to turn out, but we know that it's on. I mean, this winter that we've had here, this warm, kind of crazy warm winter, is emblematic of the kind of winters we could probably expect in the future, even if it's not directly the result of climate change. But we have very strong evidence that this thing is on. What we don't know is what that really is going to mean to the severe weather patterns.
As part of your research into severe weather, you actually chase storms. How do you decide which areas are ripe for severe weather on any given day?
Well, I should qualify that a bit. My sort of scientific research is not at all related to storm chasing. However, I think when you're obsessed with severe weather the way I always have been, it becomes sort of a personal research interest. And in that sense, with the people that I know who chase even more storms than I do or more regularly, We all are sort of constantly doing research. Meteorological community has been served better than probably any other scientific community by the advent of the internet. The amount of data that the National Weather Service puts out there is just, it's immense. It's like, it's kind of like a playland. I mean, we can go, you can look at weather model, numerical weather models that require, supercomputers. And we get to, we have the luxury of actually seeing the output of these. And then we have, I think, our own experiences. A lot of things have to come together, not just those ingredients, the moisture, the instability, the lift, the wind shear. They have to come together in the right place in an area that has good road networks so that you're not going to have a big, bunch of trees between you and the storm, because that can be really frustrating and dangerous. And then also, you want company. I used to do a lot of that solo storm chasing, and you can be successful, but if you don't have anyone to share it with, it's not as enjoyable.
Historically, what was the biggest tornado event in the Twin Cities?
Well, this is a matter of scale. Who knows? The one that, even though I'd say most people have no idea that this happened, people from my generation and younger do not understand this very well, was there was a very significant outbreak in May of 1965. That was one evening, a couple hours, and a lot of damage. And if you look at where those tornadoes were, you can look at the maps that the National Weather Service, or what was then the Weather Bureau office, and the State Climatology Office put together. They show tornadoes out in western Hennepin County and parts of Carver County where there's very little development at the time. And it still had a very high human impact. 13 deaths, multiple hundreds of injuries, and the kind of damage that you see in the southern Great Plains or in the Deep South with these big tornado outbreaks that sort of level things to the ground. And so that was a big one. That should be imprinted in our memory as something that can recur and as something that can happen. But you can go back further, so April, I think it was 1929, right around the 5th of April, there was a massive tornado outbreak. I believe one of them went basically from Lake Minnetonka through, past the St. Croix River, just north of Stillwater. And, this is the 20s. The population density was not what it is. This was a mostly agricultural area with a kind of small, dense regional center. But that, if you throw a population in there, that's another example of something really, really nasty that could happen. And then we go back, there was a kind of famous tornado, famous among, meteorologists and climatologists and historians, that hit the north suburbs of St. Paul. And it was a deadly tornado that had killed some luminaries and some, kind of well-known people. And this was, 1890. The tornado was photographed and then painted and has been the subject of, some controversy about whether it was a faked photograph, and the jury's going to be out on that one for a long time. But that was another violent tornado that passed through a relatively low population density part of this area that is actually now very high population density. And the only sort of F5 tornado in Twin Cities history, using kind of a revisited version of the old scale. So this means they didn't actually do damage ratings, but it was in 1899 in New Richmond, Wisconsin, which I think you could call the Twin Cities pretty easily. And that was it killed, I think officially 117 people, but unofficially possibly twice that. There was a circus in town. There were a lot of people from out of town. It was really hot the next day. Bodies were rotting. It was a big, big tragedy. And that thing pretty much wiped out that town. So we've had a lot. I don't know which one's the worst because the times have changed and the context has changed and our vulnerability has changed.
Well, we hear a lot about killer tornadoes, but we're coming up on the 40th anniversary of a major flash flood disaster. Rapid City, South Dakota, 1972, June 9th and 10th. 238 people die. Do we underrate the potential killing power of a flash flood?
Well, I think certainly we underrate all the things that don't look as good on camera, right? So tornadoes, they have this recognizable quality, and they can sort of get into our psyches the way, you know, parts of a horror movie can. A flood, they don't look so good. As the flood is building, it's just a lot of rain falling. A lot of times the flood actually occurs after the rain has stopped. And I would say that, yeah, the actual wall of water that's washing down a mountain or whatever would be pretty dramatic, but that you don't want to be filming it when it's coming because it's usually kind of expanding and rising as it goes. So I do think we underrate heat. I mean, heat kills a lot more people than tornadoes. Floods kill more. And I'd say that these hazards generally don't have they have the attention of meteorologists, and they have the attention of the research community. What I don't think they have the attention of is the public.
Kenny Blumenfeld is a visiting assistant professor of geography at the University of Minnesota and community faculty in the Natural Sciences Department at Metro State University, also director of projects at ORC International. Kenny, thanks for joining us on Access Minnesota.
It was a pleasure being here. Thank you.
That's all for this month's Access Minnesota. Tune in next month for a show that follows the job search efforts of returning National Guard soldiers. Thanks for watching.
Access Minnesota. Issues that matter to you. Join us again next week as we bring you the newsmakers and stories that shape our everyday lives. Access Minnesota is produced by the Minnesota Broadcasters Association in cooperation with the University of Minnesota's College of Liberal Arts.